Accretian Hospital, recovery room. The cold glow of medical chambers pulsed softly in the dimly lit space, casting eerie reflections against the sterile walls. Inside one of the advanced healing tanks, Luka floated in a viscous, liquid-filled solution, his dark hair drifting weightlessly around him. His body, suspended in the regenerative fluid, bore the marks of recent battle, wrapped in layers of artificial healing. Slowly, his eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the sterile white light that surrounded him. From outside the tank, a familiar voice cut through the silence. "Luka, how does it feel to almost die?" A small smirk tugged at Luka's lips. "Speak for yourself, Ailey." His voice was calm, yet a quiet edge of exhaustion clung to it. "It was you who almost died." In a neighboring healing pod, Ailey chuckled, shifting slightly in the pod's liquid. "Haha, well, this time I got new arms and legs." His tone was light, almost playful, but there was something forced behind his usual humor. "How many did you change?" Luka exhaled, his fingers brushing against the glass. "My back was completely destroyed, so I got titanium bones and artificial skin." He smirked slightly. "At this rate, I'll have a completely new body in a few years anyway. Might as well start early." Ailey remained silent for a moment, his thoughts unreadable. Then, without turning his face, he shifted his eyes toward Luka and spoke in a more serious tone. "The boss probably knew about the Force user, didn't he?" Luka's expression darkened slightly as Ailey continued. "The reason why we weren't warned about it, it was a test." Luka turned his head slightly toward Ailey before replying, his voice measured, detached. "Seeing how our seniors didn't step in to help, they must have figured we could handle it." He paused, then added flatly, "Nobody died, anyway." His mind drifted back to the battle, to the white-haired Force user, to the violent clash, to the way it had all ended. His fingers curled slightly. "Isn't that strange, though?" Luka murmured. "Both me and the cadet who got hit by that Force blast survived. That's not something you can just call a coincidence." Ailey's gaze lingered on Luka for a moment, before he exhaled. "Maybe." His voice was quieter this time, thoughtful. "Maybe that Force user never intended to kill us in the first place." Luka fell silent. His mind reeled back to the white-haired man's dying words. "You were just a kid." A sudden flare of anger sparked in Luka's chest. His jaw tightened. "I'm already a warrior. A soldier." His thoughts turned sharp, venomous. Letting me live was his mistake. A cold fury settled in his gut, burning like embers beneath his skin. That pathetic mercy, that hesitation, is why the Corites will continue to be wiped out. His hands clenched into tight fists beneath the healing fluid. "Regret it as you watch your people burn. Regret it from the depths of hell." Determined, Ailey pressed his hand against the inner wall of the healing pod, gripping the edge of the chamber as he tried to stand. His newly reconstructed arm tensed against the resistance of the fluid. "Luka." Luka stilled. "Why did you close the eyes of that Corite girl?" Luka's breath caught in his throat. His heart pounded, his fingers gripping the pod tighter. For a moment, he didn't respond. Panic flickered in his chest. Ailey watched him carefully. "Can you tell me why?" Luka's face turned away, his gaze sinking into the depth of the healing fluid. Then, in a flat, dismissive voice, he muttered, "You talk too much. Did they give you a new tongue too?" But his shoulders were tense. Ailey didn't push further. He simply observed as Luka, still looking away, muttered under his breath, so quietly, it was almost lost in the hum of the machines. "That was a mistake." His voice was unsteady. His hands clenched, his gaze hardening. "It'll never happen again." The scene shifted, a stark contrast from the sterile recovery chamber. A vast assembly hall loomed, its towering metal walls lined with rows of black-uniformed soldiers, their postures rigid, their expressions unreadable. At the front of the hall stood a commanding figure, a man with piercing red cybernetic eyes, his mere presence exuding absolute authority. His gaze swept across the room, before his voice rang out, booming, unwavering. "With this, you have completed 2 out of 4 years of your Imperial Guard training." A heavy silence followed, the weight of his words pressing down on the gathered recruits. "There are now batches younger than you. Set an example. Be the model that the new recruits will follow." At the front of the formation, Luka and Ailey stood side by side, their backs straight, their breathing measured. The commander's glowing red eyes flickered toward them. "Especially you two, Luka and Ailey." A pause. "The top one and the top two." His words carried an undeniable force, one that sent a ripple through the hall. "You both have the potential to rise to the rank of Centurion. Keep at it, for the glory of the Emperor and his citizens." Without hesitation, Luka and Ailey responded in unison. "Yes, sir." Though their voices were strong, sweat trickled down their backs. Luka's mind churned. A centurion. His thoughts spiraled deeper. The Imperial Guard is structured simply. 1,000 guardsmen, divided into 10 centuries, all under the command of a chief centurion. His pulse quickened. The chief centurion isn't just a title, he leads the first century himself, the elite of the elite. The commander turned away, his attention shifting back to the sea of trainees. That's all. Continue your training. Luka clenched his fists. Cadets like me, after undergoing full-body mechanization, are assigned to the lowest-ranking century, the 10th. His red eye flickered. But if I can become the centurion of the 10th century, a slow smirk curled at his lips. I can rise higher. I can make it big. The scene shifted. A metallic clang rang through the combat arena, followed by another, a sharp collision of reinforced limbs. The sound reverberated through the enclosed space, echoing like a war drum. 2 figures moved within the ring, their metal limbs clashing with each strike, Luka and Ailey. Ailey stepped back, his stance unwavering, his newly replaced metal arms shifting as he prepared for another strike. His expression was resolute. Luka, on the other hand, remained calm. His movements were minimal, precise. He dodged, his stance fluid, avoiding Ailey's attack with effortless ease. But Ailey wasn't letting up. He pressed forward, throwing a series of rapid punches, his metal fists cutting through the air with sheer force. Luka blocked each one, but sweat glistened on his brow. As he parried another blow, Luka's thoughts sharpened. Ailey, he's stronger now. His new arm is giving him an edge. Ailey pivoted, launching a swift kick, but Luka moved first. A sudden shift. A precise counter. Luka's foot swept inside Ailey's stance, disrupting his balance. Ailey's eyes widened in surprise. Luka struck. His fist flew forward, stopping just an inch from Ailey's face. A smirk tugged at his lips. That makes 124 rounds and 124 wins, Ailey. Ailey exhaled heavily, his shoulders sagging slightly in defeat. Above them, space stretched infinitely, the sky a deep blue canvas speckled with distant stars and glowing nebulae. Far in the distance, the wreckage of a battlefield still burned, its smoldering remains a grim reminder of their reality. Ailey let out a tired sigh, leaning back against the cold metal beneath him. I thought I'd finally win this time. Luka sat beside him, his gaze fixed on the distant flames. He smirked. If getting new parts was all it took to get stronger, then what use is training? Ailey turned his head, watching Luka's profile in the faint glow of the distant fires. Looks like you've become even more rigid since that speech. A smirk tugged at his lips as he continued. The centurion thing seems to have really gotten to you. Luka didn't turn to face him. His gaze remained locked on the battlefield. His voice was quiet, but firm. Of course. Luka leaned back against the cold metal rooftop, the distant hum of the military base thrumming beneath him. His gaze remained fixed on the endless expanse above, where stars burned like distant embers, eternal and unreachable. His voice broke the silence, calm yet edged with quiet determination. If I gain enough experience serving as an Imperial Guard, I'd be welcomed anywhere. Ailey, sitting beside him, exhaled lightly before replying. You're already in a position where your birth no longer matters. He cast a sideways glance at Luka. Why don't you relax a little? Luka's red eye flickered as he turned toward Ailey, his expression unreadable, but his tone firm. Unlike you, I have nowhere to return to. His fingers curled slightly against the metal surface. I have to keep climbing, or it's over. Ailey chuckled softly, but Luka ignored it, his voice continuing, low and unwavering. Ailey, you have talent, but you lack drive. Why do you even want to be a guardsman? Ailey tilted his head, his golden hair catching the dim glow of the outpost lights. Does it look that way to you, too? Then, with an almost wistful smile, he leaned back, his eyes reflecting the vast universe stretched above them. I wanted to be a scholar, an archaeologist. His voice carried an unfamiliar softness, to study the lost Arcane civilization. Luka, still watching the stars, frowned slightly. Then why don't you? If that's what you want. Ailey turned his head toward Luka, mildly surprised at the question. A faint, knowing smile tugged at his lips. Because it's forbidden. The Empire strictly prohibits independent research into the Arcane civilization. His voice carried an unspoken weight, a truth buried beneath years of acceptance. Besides, my family has produced multiple generals. They'd never allow me to do anything else. Luka's brows furrowed slightly. Are you saying you're upset because you can't do what you want? His voice hardened. You're spoiled. Ailey blinked, but Luka's words didn't waver. There are countless people in the slums who don't even know if they'll make it to the next day. His voice grew colder. Plenty are thankful just to have something to eat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Aile turned fully toward Luka, his golden eyes searching for something in his friend's unreadable expression. With a small chuckle, he finally spoke. I thought you'd say that. I just told you something I've never told anyone before, Luka. Luka stiffened slightly at those words, but didn't look at him. Instead, his voice came out colder, sharper. Some might take what you said as a criticism of the Empire. He turned, his red eye gleaming in the dim light. If someone reports you, you'll be ruined. Aile didn't flinch. He simply smiled. Luka let out a slow exhale, before closing his eyes. But you know I won't do that. His voice was quieter now, more introspective. Just like I kept your secret. Then, something shifted in his expression. His voice dropped lower, the weight of his past pressing down on his words. I only hesitated because my opponent was a non-combatant. His jaw clenched. Even if it wasn't for you, I would have gone back to finish the kill. Aile watched him carefully, saying nothing. Luka's face turned serious, his red eyes glowing faintly, the remnants of an unshakable conviction burning within him. I am loyal to the Empire. His voice carried absolute certainty. The Emperor saw my potential when no one else did. His grip tightened. The enemies of the Empire are my enemies. Then, his gaze snapped toward Aile, his expression hard as steel. That includes you, Aile. You're no exception. A long silence stretched between them. Then, Aile grinned. It wasn't mocking, nor bitter. Just a simple, knowing smile. Without a word, he stood, stretching slightly before walking toward the edge of the rooftop. Then, with ease, he jumped down. Luka barely had time to react, before Aile's voice called up to him from below. Liar. Luka's breath hitched slightly, his red eye narrowing. From below, Aile glanced up at him, still grinning. If your allegiance to the Empire was truly unshakable, you would have tried to kill me already. Luka said nothing. Aile turned away, walking off into the night, his footsteps fading into the distance. His parting words drifted up to the rooftop. Don't push yourself too hard, Luka. Luka stiffened. For a brief moment, his conviction wavered, just enough for doubt to creep in. Because deep down, he knew. Aile was right. A bitter smile ghosted across his lips, barely there. Idiot. He exhaled, his voice barely above a whisper. You'll die if you keep that up. Third-year training mission, Reconnaissance. A year had passed. The scene shifted to a breathtaking expanse, a vast cityscape bathed in golden sunlight. Towering futuristic structures, remnants of a bygone civilization, stood in the middle of a dense forest, their sleek surfaces reflecting the warmth of the sun. White metal hand reached out, touching the surface of one of the ancient towers. A quiet murmur broke the silence. This is an arcane site. As the figure fully emerged from the shadows, a black cloak fluttered in the wind. His hands, pale against the metal, traced the faint energy lines etched into the structure. Then, a voice, filled with awe, wonder, and unrestrained excitement. There's still an energy response, even after millions of years. His face became visible. It was Aile. His eyes shone with childlike fascination, a wide smile stretching across his face. He turned back toward the others, his voice carrying a barely contained excitement. Isn't this cool, Luka? Luka stood behind him, clad in the same black reconnaissance cloak, his stance rigid. Sweat trickled down his brow, as did the others behind him, trainees standing in silence, wary and tense. Aile, however, remained completely at ease, his gaze locked onto the ancient structure. There were civilizations that explored the stars long before humans even existed. Luka hesitated. His jaw clenched as he thought to himself, I've drawn my line, but he doesn't hesitate to cross it. The wind stirred, ruffling their cloaks. Luka took a step forward, his voice breaking through the moment. Don't get careless, Aile. Aile barely reacted, his hand still pressed against the tower. Luka's voice turned sharper. This is a reconnaissance mission, not a history lesson. If we encounter another force out here, it won't be a game, it'll be a fight. Aile finally turned, a grin playing at his lips. Even if we can't beat them, someone from the guards will come for us. Luka's teeth clenched. Frustration boiled over as he bit his lower lip, his patience thinning. Before he could finish, a presence stirred behind them. Soft, deliberate footsteps approached. Luka only became aware of the newcomer when they spoke. The present exists because of the past, and only through that record can we predict the future. A new voice, calm and composed. Luka's eyes narrowed as he turned toward the figure. A young man with white hair and piercing red eyes walked toward them, his expression neutral yet intense. His eyes were wide. If you think about it that way, it makes sense why so many are drawn to history. Luka's mind raced. Claude. His family isn't as powerful as the Karthikas, but they still hold influence. Claude's red eyes settled on him, and suddenly, he smiled. Luka, can I ask you something? Luka didn't respond. He simply stared at him, unreadable. Claude tilted his head slightly, his grin widening. I think I like you. Are you seeing anyone? Luka's entire body stiffened. His breathing grew heavy, his muscles tensing, his eyes flaring red as anger surged through him. He immediately took a combat stance, his fists clenched. If you come any closer, I'll consider you a threat. Claude chuckled, rubbing the back of his head. You don't need to be so tense. If you weren't seeing anyone, I was going to introduce you to my little sister. Luka didn't relax. His voice was clipped. I'm from an orphanage. Claude's smile didn't waver. Orphanage, nobility, it doesn't matter. You're still likely to outrank me one day. Think about it. He gestured casually, his voice light. My sister's pretty cute. A hazy figure appeared in Luka's mind. A girl, long white hair, striking features, and a presence that felt strangely significant. If you got it, let me know in the comments. Before Luka could react, Ailey stepped beside him, his grin returning. His voice was teasing. You're popular, Luka. Luka exhaled sharply, still frustrated. Shut up. But before he could dwell on it any longer, his mechanical eye suddenly flickered, processing an anomaly. A biological response detected. Ailey noticed it too. Their postures changed instantly. Luka's voice cut through the tension. A biological response. Ailey's group, take cover and provide support from the rear. Trainees dispersed into defensive positions, vanishing into the dense foliage. Luka and Claude remained in the front, crouching behind the trees, for cover. Luka's breath slowed as his eyes locked onto a figure ahead. His mind screamed. There's something up ahead. A lone warrior stood in the clearing. A massive spear rested in his grip. Above him, a floating, glowing square-like object pulsed with energy. Around it, four ancient pillars stood engraved with forgotten symbols. Luka focused. His eye zoomed in. And then, his entire body froze. His eyes went wide. His pulse pounded. A helmet. A white armor-clad warrior. A name flashed in his mind like a death sentence. Damn it. A chilling realization gripped him. That's a Corite Paladin. The warrior tilted his head slightly, as if noticing their presence. Luka and Claude both stiffened, fear crawling up their spines. Then, the paladin raised his hand. His spear lifted into the air, glowing with a radiant white energy. Luka's heart hammered in his chest. Panic surged through him. He turned to Claude. Run. Claude barely had time to react. A blinding white light exploded forward. Luka's words were cut short as the spear shot forward at incomprehensible speed. It ripped through the air, and before Luka could even react, the spear struck. Claude was sent flying. Blood sprayed into the air. Luka's breath caught in his throat. His jaw dropped. His entire body went cold. His voice barely escaped his lips. Claude. The paladin stood still, calm, unshaken, and in complete control.